Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Thelma Golden, and I'm the Director and Chief Curator of the Studio Museum in Harlem, and I'm thrilled to begin the Roundtable program for the Studio Museum in Harlem's 2021-22 Artist in Residence exhibition titled, It's Time for Me to Go. On behalf of the Studio Museum in Harlem, I want to thank you all for joining our discussion today in celebration of the phenomenal 2021-22 cohort of the Artist in Residence program. Cameron Granger, Jacob Mason Macklin, and Qualisha Wood. I could not be happier to gather in this digital space. Thank you to the numerous supporters of the exhibition and of our Artist in Residence program. Now in its 54th year, the Studio Museum's iconic Artist in Residence program has given emerging artists an unparalleled opportunity to develop their practice in an 11-month residency and offers audiences a chance to view this work in an annual exhibition and program. Please join me in extending my deepest congratulations to Cameron, Jacob, and Qualisha. Today, we celebrate you, your work, and your unique and passionate visions for living and creating. This exhibition marks the 4th year of an ongoing partnership with the Museum of Modern Art and MoMA PS1 that sees the annual Artist in Residence exhibition take place at PS1 while the Studio Museum continues construction on our new home on 125th Street in the heart of Harlem. Immense gratitude to the entire team at both MoMA PS1 and the Studio Museum. We're so grateful for our partnership with MoMA PS1, which allows us to continue with this critical component of our programming while we await our new home. Your ingenuity and spirited effort to bring this exhibition to life is reflected in the title of the exhibition that was come to by these 3 incredible artists. So in addition to congratulating them, I also want to celebrate and congratulate Yelena Keller, our assistant curator, for fearless dedication and the energy that she poured into this exhibition. Thank you for your leadership of the Artist in Residence program, and to co-organizer Jody Graff, assistant curator at MoMA PS1, and the entire team for being such amazing collaborators. This program and every program we do is made possible by the work of the incredible team at the Studio Museum. So again, thank you to them. And now I'd like to turn the program over to Dayon Huff, Director of Public Programs. Thank you all.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Thelma. On behalf of the public programs team, including Melania Graham, Naomi Aminu Fasea, and Maya White, I'd like to extend additional welcome and appreciation for you spending a bit of your Friday with us. And a little housekeeping, this program is being recorded. Closed captioning, generously provided by Stenocaptions, is available by selecting the CC icon, also located at the bottom of the screen. An ASL interpretation is generously provided by Probono ASL. Over the course of this program, please feel free to shower our heirs in love and encouragement in the chat. And in general, we request that within this space we share, that you show kindness, compassion, and respect towards our panelists and your fellow attendees. We encourage you to watch today's program in gallery view by switching your viewing settings in the top right corner. Today's program will consist of a conversation between Yelena Keller, assistant curator, and our 2021-2022 Artist in Residence. There will be time for a Q&A post-conversation, so please feel free to drop any questions into the chat or Q&A space at any time. And before I pass things along to Yelena, brief introductions of our heirs. Cameron A. Granger is Sandra's son and came up in Cleveland, Ohio. Inspired by the rigorous, careful archival practices of his grandmother, Pearl, Granger uses his work as a means to quilt the histories of his communities, redacted by empire, into new, not just potential, but inevitable futures. Jacob Mason Macklin examines how painting, in the age of social media, post-camera, and after the Patriot Act, functions as a tool for looking and surveillance. With slashing, cutting, and undulating brushstrokes, Mason Macklin distorts and repurposes archival images and recollected imagery in an attempt to simultaneously embrace, explore and unsettle motifs of libido and violence as typified in countercultural iconography. And Qualisha Wood is a textile artist whose work contemplates Black female embodiment, inspired by a familiar relationship to textiles, craft, Microsoft Paint, and internet avatars. Wood's tuft and tapestry pieces mesh traditional craft and contemporary technological materials. Full bios can be viewed in the chat or on our website. And with that, I'd like to invite my colleague Yelena, as well as Cameron, Jake, and Kalisha, who I see are already on screen, to join me on screen for this conversation. And as we begin, one word I'd like to offer that embodies this stunning show for me is linger. Enjoy.
Thank you, Dayon and Thelma, and thank you to everyone in this virtual room for coming together and holding space for these three incredible artists. It is truly remarkable to be able to gather together to celebrate your work and each of your practices over the course of this residency program. It has been a personal joy and honor to work with the three of you, Cam, Qualisha, and Jake, over the course of this residency, in a moment of continued change and transition, both within the institution and in the world. Your work reminds us of the importance of vulnerability and offers us a generous, thoughtful, and tender vision of Black existence and becoming. We are so honored to hold and to be held by this exhibition through and beyond this moment. With practices spanning video, installation, painting, and textiles, the work of this exhibition explores the tensions and relationships between physical, digital, and psychic space. The title phrase, "It's time for me to go," proposes the gallery as a site of both departure and arrival, and the act of making as an experience of release and embrace. The works of this exhibition blur distinctions between fact and fiction and public and private as they subvert Black figuration by challenging the notions of Blackness as a singular entity and examining deeply what it means to engage with the Black subject. With that, I'd like to begin by thinking a bit about each of your relationships to looking. As we've seen across your practices, Qualisha, Jake, and Cam, the negotiations of what it means to look versus see, to engage with community as a kind of looking, and as well to subvert or challenge the role of the gaze. This feels like a ripe place for us to begin as we think of this idea of "it's time for me to go" and each of your relationships to the self, to the subject, and to the viewer through this idea of looking. And so I'd like to start with hearing a bit of your thoughts on this idea.
I can hop in first for once. I think for me, I have to start where the difference lies between looking and seeing, perhaps. And I think for me to look right is very surface level versus what I want to be seen or how I want people to feel seen or how I want to feel seen. And so I think for me, there's a distinct difference there. And then that impacts how I approach the work or the work that I make. And so I think about looking right with the gaze upon like my body, upon the self and that relationship. And then I think about the challenging of that as looking back at something. And so I think in a lot of my works in exhibition, I focused more so on like this kind of counter surveillance instead of just focusing on the relationship of being surveilled. And then thinking about who is seen in these conversations, right? What are the audiences that are coming into the space, who has access to these things? And then how do I make those people, other Black femmes in particular, feel seen and feel held by the work? And how do we have kind of a lingering, Dan said linger earlier, and I think that's a great word, right? How do I have people like linger and really see the work on a deeper than surface level?
Thank you, Qualisha. I love this idea of counter surveillance and also what it means to sort of insert yourself into the work, which each of you do in a variety of different ways and manifests kind of differently across your practices. Cam, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this idea of looking and how that sort of maps to your work.
Yeah. So one of my favorite like Toni Morrison quotes is when they're asking her about audience, and she mentions the invisible man, and she says invisible to whom. And I think I really love that because, you know, she's speaking about how for her, like these Black men, Black people, her folks, like she's always seen them and they've always been seen, they've always been held. And I guess for my work, I'm thinking about something similar of like less of an oppositional gaze and more of like a reconstructive gaze. And how do we look back, look like, how can I, be here, look back at my homie over here and be like, yeah, I see you. That's one of my favorite Blackisms. Like, I see you, homie. And like, go back and bring you here and be like, okay, how can we make each one of ourselves feel fuller and held, like Qualisha said, through looking, through really like seeing one another. And yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. I feel like I go on and on, but yeah, for me, I really want to cultivate that reconstructive gaze through the work.
Beautiful. And Jake, I know this has been a concept that's really centered in your work as well. So I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about looking and seeing and what that means for you.
Sure thing. Yeah, I mean, I think Cam, well, firstly, thank you. This is like, it's fun to be here and see you guys in this platform and get to talk. Yeah, I mean, looking and seeing, I mean, they're integral parts of any sort of practice. And I think for me, especially, I'm painting people for this body of work and it's time for me to go. And I think that, it was multi-pronged. It became a point of contention, a point of desire, and actually, even, I mean, this sounds a little tinfoil, but like a point of liberation. And I think that, talking about counter surveillance and the reconstructive looking, I think that for me, looking and seeing operate from a place of trying to figure out how accurately can I pinpoint the sensation of what it means to look at somebody and view somebody or be viewed. And I think that a lot of the time, in my tenure in Harlem, walking to and from the studio to kind of collect ideas for the work, I got a lot of glimpses of people. So I call it a sustained glimpse. And like that sensation to me was very important. And I think that, one thing painting does do is it offers a sustained looking. However, I don't feel like that's true to life. I feel like when we look at each other, there's a lot of infinite possibilities and doubts and desires and little nuanced feelings that go into wanting to look or not wanting to be looked at. And I think that when I paint and in my work, I'm really interested in how can I visualize these kind of, trepidations, these kind of wants, these needs to be seen, to be, invisible even. And so, yeah, looking and seeing, I mean, from that personal aspect, it feels like I'm mostly trying to figure out what does that actually, what does that feel like? How can I visualize that?
Amazing. Thank you, Jake. I feel like this leads us into sort of thinking more broadly about all of your work. And there are so many across your practices, but specifically this sort of idea of looking and seeing, engaging with the body and with the self from these various different vantage points feels so prescient. And I'm thinking of you, Qualisha, and you spoke about this already a little bit, but in your work throughout the exhibition, you are contending with what it means to be a Black femme on the internet, right? And sort of resisting the commodification of Black femmes in a digital space by subverting the memification of Black women and sort of your own image. How has your own experience on the internet informed this work and how you're engaging with yourself as a protagonist throughout this kind of varied aspects of your practice?
Yeah, I think my experience on the internet is very complicated. I think there are many joyous moments on the internet, and then I think there are many violent moments on the internet. And I think even sometimes that violence can come from memification, like can come from a lot of like the harmless acts. I think we think about how there's a lot of jokes that are like Black women run the internet. And I think, it's true in a lot of ways, but I think like kind of like with that pedestaling comes, right, this like negative downside of kind of, right, being exalted as this kind of person who has to always be right all the time, who can't do things wrong. And so I think there are a lot of complexities that exists within like the Black femme experience, like on the internet. And there's a lot of visibility. It's almost suffocating, I think, like the amount of hyper visibility. And I think as time went on, I learned that everything I did, I was being watched. And so part of what led me to kind of reclaiming my own body on the internet was leaning towards being hyper visible in a way that would allow me to feel comfortable. But also, I think the challenge became then in the work of, okay, I've put my body into this work. People are used to now seeing it, right? So I think as time goes on, people become accustomed to whatever norms, right, that we put out there. And I think as time went on, I felt like people were then like getting like complicit in a sense of being used to seeing it, right? So then I think part of being on the internet is surviving on the internet really is about like introducing new challenges. And so in the work, I'm thinking, well, what are ways that challenge, right, your ability to look directly on the work? What are ways that challenge access into the work? Are there layers? Are there barriers? Are there pop-up windows? Are there things that just kind of make it a little more difficult? And so that was a long way to say that my internet experience, I think, is never ending and constantly reinforming. I think every single day it's a new thing, right? But even going back into, you know, the puppeting works dealing with my childhood, right? There are certain childhood experiences of being, right, a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old on the internet versus now being a 26-year-old on the internet. There are very multiple different perspectives.
Yeah, thank you. I just love the way that technology sort of converges in your practice, especially with a medium that is like so tactile and has such a physical presence, but is so deeply kind of mediated through digital technologies and physical technologies. And I love also that you've sort of touched on this idea of failure and sort of the kind of ways in which a digital space is so limiting and restricting. And I think what is so true and present across all of your work, again, in kind of different ways, is this question of autonomy, right? The autonomy or kind of the freedom to fail that is so infrequently afforded to Black femmes or Black people in general. And also this idea of the sort of autonomy of mobility and kind of movement. Cameron, I'm thinking about your works on view, which, you know, throughout this exhibition, you were really sort of examining the multiplicity of home as tied to the Black experience, and recalling within that how systemic prejudices work to displace or immobilize Black communities, but also how a house or a home can really function, as you've noted so aptly, as a container for memories. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit from you about what your relationship to home is and how this work has helped you to grapple with the sort of changes that happen in one's life around how they experience or how you've experienced your own conception of home.
Yeah, that's a biggie. I I mean, I think home has taken a lot of different shapes for me. A lot of them are geographical, a lot of them are people and relationships, people that feel like home, bonds that feel like home. I am, you know, I think a lot about how these feelings, emotions, memories kind of compound into the architecture of like these four walls that we built up. Like in my mom's kitchen, there's these cracked tiles on the ground, and they're like right by the kitchen, and they're right by the sink and the stove. Two places where we're at, like literally all the time. I'm washing dishes, my sister's washing dishes, my stepdad's washing dishes. All these things get like compounded and compounded and compounded. Or like a cracked staircase right at the bottom where you put all the weight at where you step off. So like, I think there's like those geographical markers, or like how in the film specifically, Heavy as Heaven, in the back room in the red, there's that voice that my really great friend and phenomenal artist, Shayla Miller, did the voiceover for this disembodied voice. It's this spirit of the house. It's the memory in there. It's this like all those remnants, like that's the cracked tile speaking. It's this thing, it's this life that you kind of I guess you cultivate it right within it, because the house is like the house, your apartment, whatever, it's like these already built, these like four walls that were here before you and will probably be here after you. But it's like what you fill that up with that really like makes the place. And I think that's how I feel about cities too, you know, like the real like infrastructure, the like real infrastructure of care, the real like architecture of like memory, love comes from the people in the city. Like that's why the people in Columbus, Ohio is why I've spent so much of my life there. I continue to come back there why I'll probably always go back there, because of those people, you know. And I found like these pockets of home in a lot of different cities, and been really blessed to find homes in so many people in so many different places. And it's not really like what any particular like government or like city planning committee has built up. It's really like, it's the people, really.
Beautiful. And I just love the way that your work really kind of speaks to both aspects of kind of what a structural kind of house and what a home actually is, right? And so exactly what you just spoke to, right? These systems that function to sort of restrict our ability to keep a home or to exist kind of within a space don't necessarily inhibit our ability to maintain community, to maintain memories, right? Like these are the things that keep communities going. And I think that that's so beautiful. And I also think that this kind of question of site is so relevant across your works as well, and brings us really beautifully into a consideration around Jake's work for the exhibition. Jake, this new series of paintings really presents us with an intimate and tender examination and exploration, really, of Harlem, which I know has been just such a deep source of inspiration. Can you talk a bit about Harlem as a site and what it's meant for you to be in dialogue with this space over the course of the residency?
Yeah, I mean, that's also a big question. But I mean, I think first and foremost, I mean, Harlem became a site of inspiration in a way that I didn't intend. And I think in ways in which I didn't intend. I mean, it's such a, I mean, Harlem in itself isn't amazing, and it's a complicated place. It has such a rich history as a sort of kind of Black cultural bastion in the States. And I mean, but the things that, you know, inspired me the most, I didn't, you know, think about it was just the lighting. You know, I think it's one of the only neighborhoods in Manhattan that have low buildings. And so you see these big skies and you see, you know, this just kind of light-filled streets and sun-dappled avenue blocks and people, and everything is kind of, you know, I think all the sort of complexities of, you know, the kind of concrete jungle aspects of 125, and it becomes complicated when it's so scenic and beautiful. And you see all these kind of, I don't know, we were talking about like these mechanizations or these systems involved of displacement and this, that, and the third. And of course that's inherent. And these stratums are very kind of right next to you in the neighborhood. However, you know, I think that there's a resistance also in the neighborhood to that sort of pathologizing where, you know, everything is everything. It's beautiful, it's complicated, it's bustling, there's pockets of quiet. And there was that kind of state of multiplicity that really kind of got the wheels turning in my head about, okay, well, what does that look like as a painting? You know, what does that look like when I have a group of figures in a space? You know, how can I kind of create these paintings, these group scenes that imbue a sense of multiplicity and potentiality of meaning? Because there's just so many things you can read from, you know, the corner of 125th in Amsterdam, you know, that was right by the 127 space. And so I would grab a coffee and I would walk, I would talk to people, I would just observe people and get some sun when it wasn't too hot. And just the vast array of interactions and happenings that go on in the neighborhood, you know, it's just kind of like, it became an endless well, you know, so I feel like my time was a little not enough time in the day. But yeah, Harlem's inspiring for very many reasons.
Amazing. Thank you, Jake. And I also think, of course, just speaking to sort of the history of what this program is, Harlem as a site has been a space that has informed so many artists and residents as they've come through the program. And I think in this moment, kind of existing in hybrid realities, as we are quite literally on Zoom in this moment while the exhibition in its physical form is up in Queens, thinking about kind of what it means to kind of still ground this site and space that has given us so much and that houses so much of our kind of understandings of ourselves as a community and as kind of a Black people, which is so beautiful. I'd like to sort of pivot to thinking about material. Kolisha, in this exhibition, we see your tufted and tapestry works in dialogue with each other. And you spoke a little bit about your tufted works already and sort of this avatar of a childhood self. But I wonder if you might be able to talk a little bit about the relationships between these works, and maybe more specifically how medium serves as a method through which to explore these different themes of Black girlhood and womanhood, sort of across these different aspects of your practice.
Yeah, it's a hard question, but a good one, because I think through making them traditionally as two very separate practices, I think it's always been hard to think about how do they work together. But I think I'll start by answering like the medium question first and then working backwards. I think textiles for me has always been this personal relationship and this familial one, like thinking about the history of textiles as being very utilitarian, just focusing on function rather than aesthetics, rather than art, or even viewing textiles as art. And then thinking about it also as like women's work and experiencing that within my own family. Growing up in a family where my great grandmother crocheted a lot of our blankets, a lot of my like stuffed animals and like toys as a kid, just like growing up with that relationship and kind of seeing that myself like as, art and not really just as functional objects. For me, coming to tufting and to jacquard weaving was because of that relationship to my family putting, right, then like rugs on the wall, hanging weavings in the doorways as kind of like in place of just like closing a door, kind of like separations of rooms and moments in time. And so I really looked up to that, and also just thinking about the idea of queer and craft. I think when putting them together and like figuring out that relationship, beyond just thinking about times of my life and how I categorize times of my life, I also thought about how they served me. And so for the exhibition, I took the approach of thinking about my body as an operating system, kind of expanding upon this overall dialogue around like the internet, both practices kind of originating from that form, being on the computer, but understanding the self as an operating system and how the works, the tuftings and the tapestries serve as applications, as tasks, as processes that could fail or succeed, right, in terms of conveying or restoring or caring for the body. And also thinking about those things as kind of like a nighttime or daytime mode. So, working entirely in grayscale for the tuftings and entirely in color for the tapestries, kind of to signify kind of like the different sides, I think, and like then further kind of work with time in a way. I think though, at their core, their relationship just focuses on just like a constant negotiation with the self, and how there really isn't one way. I think the thing with self depictions, as they were first called in like the 1500s, when like Durer put out the first like self-portrait painting, the complexities and kind of why people didn't like it was that it allowed only one view of the inner self. And I think working in two different mediums to show multiple perspectives of the inner self, I think was really integral, right? Because there isn't, and again, we're talking about like seeing versus looking and things like that. I think there is no one way to depict one version of yourself. Like there's too much almost, like there's too many things you can show. There's too many things you can say. And I think having something that feels soft and familiar and childlike to talk about, right, Black girlhood versus something that feels a little more adult in a sense, right? A little more familiar, a little more fine art. I think to talk about, right, adulthood and like also Jacquard being one of the earliest methods for computer software, I think was really important.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I think that it comes across so beautifully in the exhibition as well, just seeing you sort of seeing yourself right across the room, but also seeing us inside of the space. There is that sort of like multiplicity of experience really kind of comes alive inside of the gallery space. And of course, across your work as you're sort of grappling with these different aspects of your own history, but also too what it means to sort of exist in a room and be so kind of hyper visible in this space. I'd love to turn to Cameron, again, sort of thinking about material, but maybe in a sort of slightly different way, kind of this idea of narrative, right? So you've referenced in your work Audre Lorde's concept or sort of practice of biomythography, where she is kind of using a narrative approach that brings together history, biography, and myth as a means to sort of tell a story, right? And you've sort of adopted this to grapple with memory and loss and displacement and their effects on community. And I wonder if you might be able to talk a little bit about the narrative that we see kind of in this work, and the role that fiction or narrative sort of plays for you in your practice.
Yeah, so I play a lot of video games, and I'm really big into some of my favorite games are these. Well, one of my favorite games is this horror game, Silent Hill 2, and I really enjoy that game in particular. But a lot of games that I enjoy are just this way of, and I think it extends to a lot of like really well-made fantasy, fictional horror media. This way that it takes these emotions that are kind of hard to put into words, these really like messy, big, heavy emotions, and puts them into something that, you know, might be hard to like verbally describe, but you feel it, you know, like it's kind of like, you know, when you see it, you know, when you feel it. And for me, when I'm thinking through a lot of these really like messy, hard to see concepts that have very real effects on like us, our bodies, us as people, where we live, where we're allowed to live, where we're able to move. These like really complex histories, maps, plannings, things that we're not really like taught how to reckon with. You know, it's these things that I only recently started to like find out about in my old age, in my current age, at my current age. But they've had such a huge effect on just like where my like where I grew up, you know, where my family's placed down roots. And so for me, I guess like doing this new approach of trying to have some sort of like fictional kind of element to it allows me to like take all these really disparate parts, all these like jumbled up histories and presence and concept and systems, and trying to weave them all together into one one package that's sort of I guess easier to point and look at and be like, hey, like this is how it be, like this is how stuff be, and like this is where we're at right now. And even just having conversations with like my mother and some of my homies that came through the opening, hearing them be able to like, oh yeah, like we're talking about the Titans, but it's really like it's the man, like is those folks that planned all this, you know, like we're talking about these monsters, but it's really like it's environmental disaster, it's urban planning, it's all these things, you know. And I think the fiction has allowed me to bring all these things together, that if I was just trying to like talk to you one-on-one about it, or create like one like 23-minute documentary, it would feel much more like, I think it would feel like pretty didactic. It would be kind of dry, and then it would also be like, I don't know, I think taking a step away, like not having everything be so like one-to-one, and kind of removing yourself, like you're like what you see in front of your eyes normally from the equation, it allows you to process these things in a way that you might not have been able to before. But it's also new to me, and like I'm not entirely sure like how to really talk about this in depth, because it's still new to me, you know, like so I'm learning, and I'm thinking more about what it actually looks like and what it does. And I'm excited to like see the life of this stuff too, as more people are able to engage with it. So like I might have a different answer for this question in like a year or something.
I love that. And also, I think that that's so tender and just speaks to what the residency is, right? It is a moment of exploration. It's a moment to sort of dig deeper, to find new pathways within your practice. And you've really done that. I wonder, just for folks who maybe are remote and maybe won't be able to come to your tender exhibition, if you might just tell us a little bit about like what the Titans are and sort of what the story is that you're taking us through in this work.
Yeah. So there's like there's a couple of things happening. So both works in the exhibition, there's 2 films. There's a 3-channel short film called Heavy as Heaven, and there's a new single channel work called Before I Let Go. And both of these films revolve around this monster invasion from I guess, species of monster called Titans, that are these giant monsters that look like men. And they are, the work is like about the invasion. It takes place 5 years after the attack. But it's really about, it's like a Godzilla movie told from the perspective of the people that survived the Godzilla attack. So it's this, you see this community trying to reckon with the forces that caused that, you know, like the disaster itself, but also like try and put together like what actually caused this disaster. Like why was it our communities that were hit? Out of all the neighborhoods in the city, why was it our Black neighborhood that got hit the hardest? And so it's a lot of like people making up what folks might call conspiracy theories, or people like taking you through, you know, it's structured like a documentary. So I'm walking with people, taking me through sites where they used to live, where they used to eat. And this like fictional narrative is spliced together with actual interviews I've done with several of my loved ones, where I'm asking them to recount interior spaces that they loved that might not exist anymore for whatever particular reason. So again, it's like this, and these interviews are spliced in with the fictional interviews, and it's creating this kind of like tapestry of lost interiors, I guess. And like thinking about like, how do we hold on to these places that we lost? How do we hold these memories? And what happens when the space that you love is not that place anymore? How do you move on from it? How do you reckon with the forces that took that away from you, you know? And where does it leave you afterwards? So yeah, that's the thing.
I love, I think, you know, I think it's important, you know, to sort of like talk through some of that as well, because I think this kind of idea of narrative or kind of the blurring between fact and fiction is such a intricate and important space to all of your work, kind of across each of your practices. And so getting into sort of the meat of what that is for you feels so important. And with that, you know, I think I'd love to kind of talk to you, Jake, a little bit about process. these paintings are neither kind of sentimental nor are they truly documentary, but rather kind of speak to the experience of engaging and in a kind of streetscape, right? And out in the world. And I wonder if you might just talk a little bit about the significance of how these streetscapes and portraits are made and what your process is, and how kind of that informs your kind of sense and relationship to the kind of picture frame.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm a stickler for process. I mean, I think that materiality is important. 99% of a painting's birth is solving the picture problem. And so I think that the material concerns for the bulk of its creation, it informs more of the worldly concerns, like the political concerns, or maybe even the emotional concerns as well. But I think I'll start the answer with an anecdote in true Midwestern fashion, where I was entering into the gallery. And one of the first people I saw was someone I was quite excited to see, someone whose opinion I respect, and he was talking to me about the work. And he said something to me that just like kind of stuck with me. So I'll share it with people. And he was like, it almost seems like you paint people, or the figures in your work are an excuse to paint. And he meant that in a way, I feel, that speaks to the kind of question that you're posing. Is like, for me, figuration or representational painting more largely, an excuse is funny, it's like a kind of rhetorically funny thing to say, but I think more so it's, there's a justification in representing an object or a figure, a subject, but it's how you paint it, that imbues certain kinds of things. And so, the lack of sentimentality or, this kind of valorizing that often happens in figuration, I find that to be inaccurate in most parts. I feel like, especially for me being such a true blue spectator within the space of being in Harlem, it felt out of place to make a hero out of any one subject. And so, I think that conceptually, that sort of middle ground allowed me, hopefully, to imbue a sort of grace that people can exist as they are in these scenes. I feel like that's kind of more authentic to the looking experience. But as far as process goes, I mean, it's really, I try to mirror as best I can the processes of looking, which is often a layered, non-linear, jumbled mess of a lot of things. And so, in my own practice, a lot of my paintings have paintings underneath, and eyes, noses, hands, bodies move, and they get replaced and recomposed onto the surface, and in a way that, I'm able to lock in compositionally something that feels a little bit more emotionally accurate. And so things judge, as do people, and I feel like a lot of my material understandings when I paint people is to the end of trying to get this weird feeling that I have when I look at people, like this sensation. And so, like, I think a lot of people ask me about the red line, and that's like a multi-pronged thing. And that's been an important kind of new aspect of my work where, one, it's practical. A lot of my process is I'm sketching constantly. I think even at PS1, I was drawing with my downtime during install. And so, like, sketching is a huge part of how I begin a piece. And so, as I collect these sketches, I try to collage them. And when I make this collage, I project it. And so once it's on a projector in my very dark studio, it's hard to see a black line with like an earth tone, like an ochre or a sienna, which is a traditional paint value that you'll use for like a cartoon. So I use the red line out of this kind of frustration with like, I need to see what I'm doing. And, true to fashion, a lot of my practice is a bit of cart before the horse, where I do something in this kind of fit of needing to see something happen. And then I come to some understanding about what the red line is actually doing, and I think that it flattens, it separates, it glows, it undulates, it's itchy. And all these things are actually quite interesting when you put it into the context of well, why are they being placed around people? And I don't have an answer for that, but I feel like that's a nice thing for the viewer to think about. But yeah, I mean, in short, like, also, I'll be remiss to say that I think that a big part of my work, especially if I do decide to paint people and showcase people, as a means to kind of, I don't know, reinforce this thread of accurately depicting someone, not only in likeness, but in sentiment and emotion, is legibility. And I think that how you paint can really play with the legibility of your subject. And I think that when we are, I'm painting these sustained glimpses, as I mentioned, I'm painting strangers and passersby. I'm also a stranger. I'm also a passerby in this. So I don't have too long to really understand a subject that I might take a snapshot of, or I might try to sear their image into my mind and bring it back into the studio, or a gesture, an outfit. And so there's certain gaps in that process. And I really think I'm interested in that gap of legibility of what do I know or what do I perceive versus what is true. And painting has a beautiful way, in my opinion, of course, of really amplifying and visualizing these unknowings through, these kind of formal applications of thin to thick, scratches, blurs, things fitting wrongly, things being too large for the space, all these kind of visual cues that you can do materially really exemplify the visual process that I'm looking for.
Thank you, Jake. I think it is so sharp to kind of recognize as well sort of the difference between seeing and what is true, right? This idea that what we see is not always true, right? Which I think comes into dialogue with early conversations around photography and painting as well, as, kind of the concept that what we're seeing within these images is fact, when in reality it is a sort of framed, reality or a non-reality, and kind of the possibility within that that you've kind of taken on through your practice as tied to a kind of Black experience as a way of sort of reinserting a kind of autonomy, a kind of illegibility as a protective measure, which is so important. Qualisha, I'd like to turn back to you as well, just thinking about sort of this idea of process, right? And kind of how work gets made, which is so kind of important and intrinsic to your practice. And you already have touched on this a little bit in thinking about kind of the Jacquard loom, right? And the histories of that. But I think across your work, what I find so incredible and so engaging is the ways in which your work comes into conversation and dialogue with the digital and sort of these kind of various layers of technology that collapse in your work, in addition to a sort of reflection on the existence of being inside of a digital space. Can you talk about how sort of traditions of craft and technology converge across your practice?
Yeah. Well, I think also similar to Jake, I think one of the reasons for me that is so useful to work in the digital for like a good portion of my practice is the ability to like rewrite and repurpose and reuse and collage. I always say like I'm a textile artist, and then like in like tiny words I put like also collage artist, because I feel like most of what I do is build an archive. And I like to think of my work as an archive in their complete state, in their middle states, in their inception. But technology and textiles coming together for me is really just thinking about. I mean, for Jacquard, it's the entire process, right? This kind of starting off. Centuries ago as a way to speed up weaving blankets. And now we're at the point where every pixel is a stitch, right? But also Jacquard's being, with the original punch card system being used to make computers, right? And women having to then run those computers until time kind of closes them out. For me, just that like relationship, I think challenges me, right? Being able to have control only to a certain extent of how my work comes out, being in control of how I, manipulate software to make these different collages for the tapestries. And then for the tuftings, it's limited drawing within a computer program, right? It's not like my hand. It's me drawing on a computer and then translating that back into a hand drawing and then translating that into a tufting. I think for me, kind of like the going in and out of analog to digital and back again, allows just more layers in the work. Having a background in printmaking, I think for me, the process has always been more interesting than the final product. I like to go kind of through a little bit of a struggle, I think, to bring out some of the best characteristics of the work. I think for me, as a person personally who is very controlling, I'm a Virgo rising, so I have kind of like a control freak problem. I think for me, there's like, this important need to have to be like subject to something else. And I think, right, forming this relationship with, Photoshop, allowing the content aware tool to use my body then like as a background image, as a mark making tool, as a pattern, I think is so important to just kind of like have this constant call and response to something else.
Thank you. And also kindred Virgo rising souls over here. Makes for a beautiful collaboration. But also, I think it is so tender, and as we've sort of been talking about, right, like you as kind of subject, then to also see the ways in which your hand is so present across this work, both kind of in a digital space, right, doing that kind of collaging, but then also in the return back to the material, like quite literally weaving into the work, or kind of doing the beading into the work, and same with the tufting, and that as like a physical aspect of your practice that really like tends to the image, right? Like we've talked so much about the actual like physicality of what it means to make this work. And that I think speaks to exactly what you were touching on earlier, this sort of idea of women's work, but also kind of a history of Black women's labor as a kind of care work, an extension of care work that is so intrinsic to a Black history and to a Black existence, that just really comes through in your own sort of tactility and your own sort of relationship to the material. I'd love to pivot to you, Cam, and I think again, sort of in thinking about these kind of different aspects of an artist's practice, we see in this installation these incredible screen printed crossword puzzles that I think were such a joyous and such a beautiful surprise for us to kind of engage with this aspect of your practice that I think we so kind of deeply appreciate your video works as kind of intrinsic to the ways that you're working, but to see a sort of quieter medium almost take shape is so wonderful. And I think particularly the way that you're sort of exploring crossword puzzles as a kind of mapping, right? We've talked about mapping and kind of what that means a bit already. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit just about that work and kind of what that work means for you and what it brings to the site of the exhibition, but also language as a kind of function, as I know you are a bit of a writer and a poet yourself, and we kind of see that in this incredible work in the show.
Yeah, the crosswords are super exciting. It's very, very, very new to me. I haven't really made like any screen prints before. I made them at a spot in Columbus Print and Art Center. My homie Mike taught me how to do it there. I had no idea what I was doing, but shout out to all of them there for helping make that happen. I think of them like I consider them poems. They're like you said, these maps of emotional movements through time and space, and I think of them like floor plans of a space. And it's like you see throughout the different crosswords these like the grid coming apart till it's like eventually in the last one there's 3 of them, and the last one they're all scattered throughout the page. None of them are like linked anymore. And I think of it like one family's movements throughout a space, like everything slowly coming undone, as like in the work again refers to the monster invasion, the Titan invasion, this rumbling that's coming, that is this outside force coming to undo the home. Not for any one particular person's fault, but just because of what's gone on. And I think in reading about crosswords, I didn't really realize how much of like a system of knowledge they are. I guess like any map is a way of like teaching you how, like the cartographer is always teaching you how to see when creating a map. And just like that, crossword puzzle maker is teaching you about their own language and what they think is valid, what system of knowledge is valid in there. And that can go many different ways. I think there's been several debates around like the New York Times crossword puzzle and like who is actually like able to solve these things, like whose histories are being referenced in these things, who gets to be a clue, all those things. And for me, like I saw that, I was thinking a lot about map making. I was thinking about like my position, my family's position, my community's position on a map. Where will we be at on this like map of the world, or a map of Ohio, or a map of like the United States, whatever. And I guess somehow, and I was also like all the work in the show is in reference to, in honor of my grandmother. And my grandma loved crossword puzzles as well. I would always see her like doing the word searches. So there's a lot of that in there. And I guess I was thinking about, like, I'm always trying to think, how can I share something with the viewer, but still keep it close to the chest? And how can I make you, like Jake was talking about, that legibility, right? And how can I make these things like, I'll give you like the tools that you need to like start to unpack some of these things I'm thinking about, but I'm not gonna like give it all to you. And for me, like I'm trying to make these crosswords as my own system of knowledge. So the clues, they're not really clues at all. They're more just like, there's these bits of prose, and the only person that could realistically solve these crosswords is me. And there are moments where I like cross out certain answers because I don't want to give you that, or they're memories that I'm trying to keep, again, like close to the chest, or maybe I don't even myself want to revisit because it's hard. So yeah, it's that way of like trying to share the thing while still keeping it close. And whenever I put together any exhibition, I'm trying to do some world building. I'm trying to like build out this like, I guess like I'm trying to have a glossary of terms and terminology and like the sort of like language being built in here. So all the heaviest having the film in the back in the red room, Before I Let Go, and the crosswords, all these things have very like common themes, common terms. There's like whole phrases that appear through like each of the works. So again, I'm trying to build, trying to world build. And I think it's just one more piece of that puzzle, I guess. They're like the footnote, maybe.
Absolutely. And I'm loving, just in the chat, we have lots of folks that are seconding heartily your crossword puzzles, which are so beautiful and so wonderful. So keep making them, keep writing, Cam, and keep thinking so deeply and rhizomatically about their possibilities. Jake, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about, I think across all of your work, we're kind of thinking deeply about sort of different technologies and different sort of systems of seeing and surveillance. And throughout your work, there is this presence of machinery and sort of the architectures of technology that we live with in our everyday life seep into the frame in a variety of different ways. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about your relationship with painting as a kind of technology, kind of what these mechanisms mean and how they kind of serve as a function inside of your work. And also kind of in this idea of painting as a technology, how that maps to your relationship to a history of painting as well.
Good question. Yeah, I mean, and a great question. Yeah, that's a good question, because I think that is like I think that's the crux of not only an answer I have, but also questions I have. I think that actually I first posed this as an urge where I was like, why am I feeling this way? Or what am I seeing? And I think that a very succinct, short answer is, I don't think there's any way to observationally paint without an acknowledgement that we live in a world that's encroached with by technology. We are constantly around infrastructure and machinery and industrialization. And I think that, there's no kind of pastoral landscape in America, or in metropolitan cities at least, that are not kind of imbued with a certain kind of technology. And, this fascination with piping and conduits has been kind of a few years long visual obsession. And just the kind of, as a visual motif, there's a lot of structure that's inherent that that I can create through painting pipework, but also an anxiety, and I feel like that state of unease is what I'm after. And I think that machinery, or like these manhole covers, these surveillance cameras, these street poles, I think because painting is so intentional, like I could make a landscape without them, but when I choose to paint them, they become objects of inquiry. You have to look at them in relationship to the people. And I think that in doing so, and using kind of painting's language of kind of everything you do and don't do is intentional, I really want to talk about the fact that, like, what is this doing? How does this inform our day-to-day life that we are kind of encapsulated with machines near us? And I think that the anxiety that I was beginning to feel as I was going on about my life as a transplant in New York, it started to inform how I was looking at people in the space. And so, I think that that was a less succinct kind of answer to the question, but also, like, I think that it's important to kind of understand that painting as a tool of surveillance is an interesting thing, or painting as a technology is an interesting kind of turn of phrase, because of course it is still one of the last analog things that we can do. I'm still making these by hand, but also, I am recording people. And that is also a turn of phrase that, has a more contemporary understanding with the usage of the camera and our cell phone and social media technology. And so it's just been like, I think that that play on words actually opened up, when coupled with this kind of desire that I had to paint city infrastructure. I think that that kind of made this weird marriage that birthed a body of work that was talking about, like, oh my goodness, like, how much am I implicated in this surveilling process naturally, by virtue of the fact that I am a painter and that I am painting people? And what entry and exit point does that offer me and the viewer in how we look at people? And I think that, also mindful that, like, there's a certain tepidness that we have around being viewed naturally, and the certain kind of qualities that I don't know. I think there's a certain tepidness in being viewed and how we view ourselves and how we atomize ourselves. And I think that when we kind of take that to task in a very open-ended way through painting, it illuminates a certain reality that I feel, again, is more attuned to just an accuracy. It's just like, it's figuring out, what is this sensation of being right now as we stand in this kind of very turbulent, uncertain, oftentimes extremely accelerated existence. And so I think that, these motifs, these manhole coverings, these conduits, these wires poking out, it almost became a visualization of, like, this looming dread in a very kind of in a very kind of beautiful sun-dappled Harlem, because it was there too.
Absolutely. And I think too, just the way that, as you all are sort of thinking through in different ways, the kind of what the experience is to exist through these kind of technological digital spaces, and the way that your paintings sort of speak to that, but also slow that down, right? Like the actual process of making a painting, but also standing in front of a painting feels really different than our engagement with images often is, right? On the computer, on our phones, we are seeing so much imagery, and our inclination to sort of slow down and hold space within that is really different than when we're standing in front of a painting. And I love this question of a bench, as I know we've sort of talked through in the conversations around the install itself, and there is a bench in Jake's gallery. But again, this sort of like invitation to slow down, but also a mirroring of the kind of experience of what it means to look out in the world as well, and sort of the kind of people watching that we all kind of engage with too. I'd love to kind of turn back to you, Qualisha, and thinking about sort of what exists within the picture frame. In your work, there are these sort of nods to religious iconography. We see this beautiful golden halo, but also too, as you've noted, right, thinking about your sort of childhood engagement with cartoons, right, as a sort of medium and a space of refuge, or a place that you sort of spent time with as a child. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about some of the kind of different layers of visual motifs that come to the fore kind of across your work, and how they function kind of in service of your kind of voice and vision.
That's a good question. I think for, there's things that are, I think, kind of consistent across both pieces. And then there are things that are totally different. I think like the easiest thing to kind of point out is this like constant reference to like the eyes, especially as pertains to the tuftings, and especially with the largest work I have, To Infinity and Beyond and Back Again, the largest tufting work that I have. The eyes were kind of something that I started thinking about as an emoji. And so often kind of these emoji eyes used to kind of appear in the tapestries a lot. And it was something I used a lot. And that is kind of, a cartoon reference, right? Thinking about the eyes, how they're so exaggerated always in children's cartoons. I mean, that's like always like the big like draw in, I think, for most cartoons is like the eye style. And there's so many different styles of eyes. But thinking about this kind of like simple eye that I wanted to directly mimic the Apple emoji, the looking emoji. And that's something I think a lot about too in the tapestries, even with like my own gaze, kind of like always trying to match or look at the viewer, and kind of having that like Mona Lisa moment of being tracked within a space. I think for the tapestries, the halo, the crosses, when I first started making the work years ago, it was so literal. It was supposed to kind of be this literal, direct one-on-one relationship with kind of my experience growing up in a Christian and Catholic family, and kind of trying to contend with, notions of what I feel like is like a super like heterosexual, very white relationship to religion, and trying to kind of unpack the fact that I didn't fit in, or contend with the fact that I didn't fit in, and that this idea of this religion, this idea of God really wasn't for me. And now kind of using those same symbols as a subversion tactic, and kind of even the embellishing of these symbols, right, to kind of queer them, and edit them and kind of more suit them to my needs. And so for me now, the halo, I like view in like such like very like simplistic terms. For me, it's a ellipse. I think now I break down these symbols as quite literally objects, for like moving the conversation kind of forward, right? Or just kind of, I think as you build visual language, you're just like, okay, like what is missing, right? What are the pieces that are associated now kind of within this iconography? And for me, it's the cursor and the halo kind of interacting with each other, kind of signifying this like relationship to an exalted being on the internet in particular, right? But also kind of thinking of that now as necessary for survival, that literal relationship to being God on the internet, right? Being, I always say like God is Bianca Ebony and she's on the internet, right? That like literal one-on-one relationship, but it's never really about anymore, right? Like the cross itself, right? And someone being on the cross. I don't think that that's necessary anymore, right? But I think just in general, the more we use different symbols, the less or the more watered down I think they become. I think even like the prayer hand emoji is a great example. Most people who use the prayer hand emoji aren't actually praying to anything, right? But it's kind of like this thumbs up, right? It's the Black thumbs up. I don't think Black people like thumbs up each other. Like we're not like, good job. I mean, I do like ironically, but I think for Black people, the thumbs up emoji is the prayer hands emoji, right? Like it's to be blessed. It's I hope this works out for you, or maybe it does. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of just like thinking about these symbols like in a very like Black technological way, I think, and kind of trying to skew our pre-existing perspective. Not the prayer emojis in the chat. You know, but just like trying to like bring these like very like white heterosexual symbols into the future and I say the present, but like even 2 seconds ago is now the past. And so thinking about these like ever marching on moments with tufting, the symbols in tufting, I think, you know, it was about recognizing that cartoons are racist in their foundations, but not wanting to focus on that. Like I think there became a point where you realize, and I realized, everything around me is founded by someone who like did not like Black people at all. And everything kind of was about working with Blackness in opposition to whiteness. And so when I think about the tuftings and thinking about the motifs I'm bringing in with tuftings, I think, how do I make the Black figure the star and the protagonist and kind of like reclaim these things like white outlines on the hands, kind of like big features, you literally using like Black instead of trying to like render the perfect shade of brown that like someone thinks I am. How do I like kind of like reclaim this problematic idea and turn it into something that I'm just literally using as a placeholder for myself? And so for me, it was just like having, and I spend a lot of time doing this, probably hours, just watching cartoons. Thank God that HBO finally got all the Looney Tunes episodes on there. So I'm like, I just go through seasons and seasons and seasons of different cartoons, and I just look and I just watch, and I just freeze. Sometimes I freeze frame, and then I think about that moment. And there's certain elements, there's certain reoccurring things like bathrooms or being outside or like windows for me that I think in the tufting serve more as symbols than literal things, like literal objects that you would just associate with. Like I don't think people think about a window as a symbol, but for me, especially thinking about like the title of the exhibition, a window as a portal. And then I think that's another kind of like overlap between the tapestries and the tufting too, like the ways that windows exist. Windows of the tapestry literally referring to the operating system and kind of as this like means of travel through the internet or through a computer, through an operating system, and windows and a tufting usually inviting someone in or exiting from a situation, but also kind of referring back to that foundation for me of drawing, which was again like drawing in like Windows 95 on the computer, and also thinking about kind of just like perceived danger. Windows kind of allow me to think about what's on the other side, what don't we see, the light shining through something versus not shining through something, like what's hidden in the darkness. So I kind of hope that answered it. There were a lot of things that I just started thinking about in the middle of that.
Woo, you just gave us so much, Kalisha.
I was like, I'm like, my brain turned on.
Yes, like, yes, but like here for all the sort of spirals, and it just speaks to kind of how intricate and rhizomatic your thinking is around this work. So thank you. And I think also just this kind of idea of, this idea of like worship and idols and kind of the ways in which your work is able to kind of give flowers in a way, right? And kind of speak to what it means to be kind of on the internet as a Black femme. We see so many Black people in general on the internet that are kind of purveyors of a larger pop kind of cultural iconography and language that don't get recognized for that cultural production. And there is a sort of returning to that and an honoring of that exists in your work as well. And this idea of kind of honoring and speaking to a practice of kind of citation. Cam, you know, I think within your work and within your installation for the exhibition, quite literally, we see several stacks of books where you have kind of brought in authors such as Toni Morrison and Kate Jemison, Octavia Butler, to name a few, many others, into the physical space of the installation. And also to the friends and community members and family that are kind of featured in your films. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of collaboration, but also the importance of citation in your practice and what you kind of learned from bringing folks into the space of your making?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Quilicia said this earlier, how she thinks of her works as an archive. And I'm totally in the same like way of thinking. I mean, you see it, like, I think now it manifests very physically in the way that I'm making these larger structures that are taken from many different places. Like the one up front is from wood collected from development projects throughout Harlem. The one in the back is taken from found wood from Cleveland and Columbus, my two homes. So like there's that like material archiving, but I mean, I think the citations in the books, the citations, the bringing all my loved ones into whatever work I possibly can. For me, it is, I mean, I think I'm reaching back to the work that my grandma did when she would have everyone's baby photo in the crib. Like, yeah, everyone's baby photo, everyone's graduation photo. She had like some of my homies' graduation photos. I don't even know how she got them. She had like just so many, like, it was like this, it was this grandma archiving. And that is such, and it goes back, and like these photos went back to generations. And I think that is just such essential, such vital, essential work of record keeping and remembering that like we are here, we were here, we loved each other, we loved on each other. And I think especially for like a generation like hers and the one before hers, where, you know, there were people that weren't even counted on the census yet, you know, like, and so like having that like physical evidence of the photograph is just, it was so much more massive than I think she even maybe I don't want to say, like, I think it was just so much more massive than at least I gave credit for when I was growing up. And even the way she arranged these photos in her home, like on her table, like an altar, like that's curation too. So I'm thinking of like that's like the art history that I pull from when I'm thinking about these things, right? This like really like rigorous archive keeping, curation, arrangement of histories that I want to celebrate with my own practice. And, you know, realizing that as a artist who's Black making the work I do, like I'm standing on the shoulders of so many like giants, incredible people who have really just laid such an incredible foundation for me to do what I do. And I think showing the ways, showing like really like physically showing like, okay, like bringing this stuff in, like this is what informed this work, this is what informed me as a person, trying to bring that in. And then like bringing the homies in and being like, yo, like I want you to be able to, you know, like I always say like my audience is as far as my arms can reach. And like my friend, like I'm making for that, those are the people I'm making this work for, those are the people that inform the work, and bringing them into it. And that is, for me, that's like that's the most important thing. You know, it goes back to that like seeing, right? Like I want them to be able to like see themselves in there, like really like actually, you know, see themselves in the film, but also be able to go to the thing and see themselves in the thing, you know. And at the opening, they were like, almost everyone that was in the film came through. Bunch of homies that weren't even in the work came through to celebrate, and like it was just such an amazing moment for me. Like we were standing there with them, and they're them be able to point to their parts and be like, "That's me," or like pose next to themselves on the screen, and like that's what I want to do, you know. And then I'm hoping that, you know, years down the line, I'm hoping that, you know, God willing, this work still exists, these images still exist, you know, years down the line, like after I'm gone, after many of us are gone, like that, people still be able to look back and see us in this work and be like, know that we were here, that we loved each other, and that we was holding each other. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do when I like bring all this stuff in there.
Amazing, Cam. Thank you so much for that. Y'all are really taking us there today in this afternoon of a Friday. But I so appreciate just the thoughtfulness of all of you, of all three of you, and to sort of build on our chat to this. We have so many wonderful folks who are kind of shouting out grandmas as the OG archivists, matriarchs as the original archivists, which is so true and so tender across this work, but also you, the three of you, right, kind of inscribing into history actively, yourselves, your communities, your friends, your family, and that is so present for the three of you across your practices and in a variety of different ways that just feels so impactful in the moments that we're able to kind of share physical space with these works. And as you noted, Cam, to see folks see themselves, whether that is a one-to-one, like that's literally me, or just to see themselves as in, you know, I feel seen in this work is so important and so present across your work. Jake, I'd like to also come to you to talk about points of inspiration, to talk about this sort of idea of citation. I know that this exists for you deeply as a practitioner, as an artist, kind of in your own practice. And so I'd love to kind of hear you talk a little bit about some of your influences, both within sort of a history of painting, but also I know that your influences are kind of broad and wide across different mediums. You've talked a lot about Harlem Renaissance writer Jean Toomer, as well as kind of prominent painters throughout history. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about who those influences are and how they impact your work, and how they inform maybe your own sort of vision for your practice.
Sure. Yeah. I'll start with Jean Toomer. I mean, I think Jean Toomer is someone that I started reading in college, and he stuck with me throughout my whole life. And I revisit Kane often. I revisited Kane for my thesis show in college, and I revisited it once again for this show. And I think one of the reasons why I love Jean Toomer is I strive for that. You know, it is an ambivalence, but it's different. It's, you know, there's not a glorification. There's not a kind of, there's a duality, I think, more simply put, in this kind of transient quality of being Southern. What is the South to him? Being a man that might, you know, comes up north, and what is the East Coast, you know, at this time that he's writing in relationship to the South, and then going back down to Georgia after kind of ingratiating himself in these kind of East Coast New England circles. And that kind of constant transience and poeticism always resonated with me in a way that, you know, I kind of had the opportunity in a microcosm in my own way to, you know, offer or be in a state of transience. And I have to talk about something. You know, the Studio Museum in Harlem is the Studio Museum in Harlem. You know, it is a quite specific residency at the end of the day. And I think that I decided with this body of work to lean into that aspect and take the liberty of allowing myself to make paintings with the semblance of Harlem. Because kind of, you know, to Qualisha and to Cameron's work, you know, I paint people I know all the time, and they're in those paintings. And it's funny, you know, friends, I mean, I make my limbs when I don't have references. So I'm in my own work in very funny ways if you think about all the people that are actually in those paintings. So it gets a little tricky there. But I mean, outside of, you know, Jean Toomer, I mean, I'm influenced by so many painters. Fan of Per Kirkeby, Albert Erlin, abstraction, big abstractionist, you know. I mean, I'm always a fan of de Kooning, Colescott, Gustin, who cannot be, you know, these people that whose mentality about painting and the kind of perseverance and the kind of, I don't know, tenacity to really drive home a point of understanding about how you see the world, but also a malleability. You know, I think that a practice is often about changes in how you think and who you are and who you love and how those things are informed. And, you know, outside of the art historical, I mean, there's so many to list. You know, I would be remiss to say, I mean, Bonnard is one of my favorites, and I'm still contending with how to look at Bonnard after years of looking. And so, but, you know, outside of that, I think a lot of my interests I put in my work, I am interested in very weird things. I mean, I think that walking through St. Nicholas Park and seeing the sun dapple the grass from where the sun is poking through the trees, I mean, that made me want to paint. I know that sounds very granola, but, you know, as it goes, you know, these little things about these daily life processes, you know, I find them extremely inspirational, like a cluster of wires in a train station where you're like, oh, that's kind of dangerous, but it's also quite beautiful. And it gives me anxiety. So like, what am I feeling? And so, you know, all of these things, you know, constantly inspired. And it's trying to get those sensations back into the studio, you know?
Thank you.
Yes.
Wow. Just feeling so held by this conversation, by all of your generous offerings. I think I can speak for everyone in the room when I say thank you for opening up your practice to us all, both in the kind of physical rooms of the galleries, but also through this conversation and being in dialogue with the three of you. You've given us so much to spend time with, to think through, to ruminate on, to feel affirmed by. And so I just want to say thank you. Endless gratitude for such a thoughtful and engaging conversation, one that I have been so privileged to have with the three of you over these last 11 plus months, and now to kind of turn that to our audience and to a public is just such a deep honor. Before we go, I'd like to turn the floor over to Maya White, our incredible public programs intern, who will share some questions from the audience, because our audience is here and present and eager to keep chatting with the three of you. So without further ado, Maya.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Yelena, for such a beautiful talk, and Eris for all your beautiful questions. I'll first just ask one of my own questions as people hopefully add some more into the Q&A box there. I loved hearing what all of you said about tenderness and care. And throughout the course of my internship, I've actually been thinking a lot about healing and care work and what the role of art makers and art institutions is in that. So I'm wondering what you all think about that, particularly as it pertains to Black people. And you can speak about your own praxis or greater institutions and other people, just whatever you think.
So the question's about care in the work, care more largely. You know, I mean, those, you know, that seems to be like, that it's funny how that is like a contemporary concern. Like, I feel like at no other point in time did we, you know, did people ask of artists or themselves, like, what does care look like in your work or care for others? And, you know, and it's just such an interesting thing that, like, I mean, I guess I'm going to speak less from my own practice and more of like an observation of my cohort, like the level of thoughtfulness that goes into, and I guess I can't think about myself in this. It's just like, I think that care happens in many ways where, like, I think that there is something to allowing someone to be seen if you are representing them. in all of their kind of potential. You know, the cliche is the good, bad, and the ugly. You know, I think that when I paint people, I really try to leave a lot of space for everything to be considered about this person, and not even my read of them. You know, like my impression of somebody is my own, but in a funny way, if I can, I try to like add a level of separation that allows them to be somebody else outside of my perceptions. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's how I try to show care and a reverence for my subject, because I do paint all sorts of, you know, different walks of life. And I think that in order to do that, there has to be a level of respect and care for the subject.
I think when I think about care in the work, I mean, I focus a lot, I think, on self-care, which I think allowing yourself to participate in self-care, not just like I need a face mask self-care, right? But like a true examination and honoring, like kind of like of the self, I think allows you to care for other people. Like I think we talk about all the time how you can't love someone else if you don't love yourself. But I think you can't even begin to care for other people if you don't understand how you want to be cared for. I think you can't really get close to people if you don't understand how you want to be cared for. And I think in art, and I think as Black art is rapidly consumed and commodified, and right now, I always say it is so on trend right now to be a Black artist. Like throughout the whole pandemic, I would say like Black art has been like on a steady and rapid rise. And there's like a way that you can just fall into the making money of that. For me personally, I'm so uninterested in doing anything that I don't care about, or making anything that I don't care about and that my mom doesn't care about, that doesn't make my friends and my family feel cared for. And so I think care really allows the work to be genuine in a lot of ways, and allows the work to remain honest and interesting and exciting. And so when we think about the people that we care about, the considerations that we're putting in the work, the intention that we're putting in the work, I think we're just all making a lot better work, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the I think the care strategies, that care ethics changes constantly. It's a lot of like listening what is needed in the moment, like what do people like realistically what's needed. And for me is uh, 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 I try and be as tethered to my communities as much as I possibly can. And I think a lot of times when I'm asked to when I need to show up and when care is needed, it's not even really necessarily as an artist. It's just like as a person that lives in this place that loves these people and wants to help out. So I guess it's like listening what's needed, But as far as specifically for my practice, I think the strategies that I found to try and center care is working slowly, trying not to rush through a project, because these are very I'm dealing with really delicate, sacred, large histories and themes, and things that are like violent themes as well. And so it's really trying to work slowly and make sure that the process feels good and good and as safe as it possibly can for everyone involved. Trying to do a lot of check-ins as I'm working with, because I'm always working with people, and trying to do check-ins on the progress and the process, and making sure copies of different edits are going out all the time, because yeah, it's super delicate. So I try and work slowly. Yeah, working slowly. And just I think it's also just being, I guess, having it not just be having the care be contained to one moment or one act, having it be consistent. I guess consistency, and every time I'm doing a show, every time I'm showing the work, I'm always making sure that everyone involved gets all the information about the work, and making sure that like I'm sending all the like just like, you know, if there's like a booklet for a piece like sent out, everyone that's involved, making sure they all get like the booklets, making sure everyone gets the invite to come to the thing. If I can help you get there, I'll try and do what I can to help you get there, you know. Just trying to keep people involved as much as they want to be, and being consistent and constantly like, because these projects have life, and so like I want you to be involved in the life of that project as much as you want to be, you know. So I guess that's where I'm trying to do.
Thank you all so much. Unfortunately, we have time for just one more audience question. So an anonymous attendee asks, have any of you at any point in your career where that one person doubted your ability or vision? And have you had a moment, I guess, where it propelled you to work even harder, better, etc.? And just any sort of inspiring, I guess, moments from y'all's stories.
Have we had haters? I don't know. Is this kosher to say? I feel like spite is a good motivator, but have I had anybody in my life that has doubted my ability and has made me work harder? I think, you know what's funny? Actually, I will, whatever. I think that may or may not ever be the case in anyone's life. However, I feel like when you're a very self-determined person, you make up things to be spiteful of and motivated by. So whether or not there is someone maybe in my life that is like, oh, this guy, you know, he's a hack. There are things, you know, there are these kind of competitive things. But maybe that's not even the question. Yes, and if there is someone in your life, anonymous attendee, yeah, if there is an op in your life, do not let this person stop you. And, you know, in fact, let it fuel you to be, you know, better in all areas that you want to be better in.
I am someone who publicly has haters. I have all sorts, everybody knows this. I have all sorts of haters. Whether it be like a random troll on the internet. I've been doxxed twice also. So I have people who have tried to harm me by like sharing my personal information to stop me. But most prolifically, I had a professor my freshman year of undergrad who told me to drop out. Like in my first semester, like 2 months in, he was like, you're not going to last here. You're not going to graduate. You're not going to get through your sophomore year. Blah, blah, blah. Jokes on him. Because like here we all are, right? But I think for me, and I think this is consistent throughout my entire practice in a lot of different ways, I'm really motivated by like what we perceive to be a block in the road. Or like even just like changing how we use things, I think is very inspiring to me, right? Something intended for one purpose and then it's brought in another way. So for me, someone telling me that I couldn't do something, that I couldn't make it, or that I couldn't succeed immediately became a challenge. I like to think of it as, you know, thriving in spite of, existing in spite of, having the audacity to endure. Because I think, you know, someone telling you that you can't do something is such a limited perspective of how they think they know you or how they think that you exist in this world. And I think for centuries, Black people have been told no, or you can't, or you don't belong, or you shouldn't do this, or you won't do this, like quite literally, you won't. I think now we owe it literally to our ancestors and ourselves to question that and to question why can't we do something, right? Is that literally true? Is something literally impossible? I think most things that are impossible just haven't been done yet. And that's what fuels my practice. And I think those moments for me are the most inspiring, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to add that hasn't been said already. Like I agree, like haters can be the motivators. But nah, I mean, like I've definitely like, I mean, I flunked my senior year of art school because I took a documentary job out of state, and then the teacher gave me an attendance like an attendance fail. And so like I had to do like whole extra time in school and all that thing. And, you know, I think about that dude all the time. Like, you know, like whenever I get like a W, I'm like, yeah, screw you, Brad, like type shit. Like, but I, you know, I mean, it's super petty, right? It's super petty. But yeah, I don't know. To be honest, like I don't spend too much time. Like it's, you know, I have so much, I don't know, I have so many people holding me down and like so many folks that like truly believe in the work and what's being done. Like I don't spend too much time on it, but of course it feels good to like stunt on someone that doubted you. Like of course it feels good. So like it's always there. Yeah.
Thank you all so much again. I wish we had more time for all the questions. I feel like this conversation could go forever. But thank you to Yelena for moderating this beautiful conversation. And now I'm gonna pass it over to PS1's Jody Graff and then my boss, Studios Dayon Hutt.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for this incredible talk. My name is Jody Graff. I'm an assistant curator at MoMA PS1. I just wanted to hop on and offer a few remarks in closing. Thank you to Cam, Jake, and Kolisha for so generously offering these insights into and reflections on your works for us. One thing that's been really amazing about working on this show with you is seeing how three such distinct artists using divergent materials can tap into shared veins of inquiry. And this conversation really illuminated those connections, but also brought forth new facets of each of your practices. I also want to extend a huge thank you to Yelena, to Maya, to Dayon, and the whole Studio Museum and PS1 teams that made this happen today. This is the 4th year of our cross-institutional collaboration and the 4th year that I've had the pleasure of working with the Studio Museum team on it. It's been amazing to co-host these exhibitions and programs while the Studio Museum constructs their new building. Each year we learned so much from working on the show, and this year is no exception. This year's exhibition is truly special, and everyone here at PS1 is super proud to be hosting it. So we invite everyone here in the audience to come see the show IRL. It opened to the public yesterday, and it'll be on view through February 27th. We're open Thursday through Mondays, 12 to 6 p.m. and until 8 p.m. on Saturdays. And as always, we are free for New York City residents. So please come visit the show, come hang out with us in Long Island City. And now I'll pass it to Dayon.
Thanks so much, Jody. Y'all, I just want to thank you all so much for this afternoon. This is like one of those moments of just reflecting on when we first got to meet you, like more than a year ago, and then you had open studios. I'm just thinking about that journey of where your practices were, but also where your voices were, and where you were in being able to articulate and really own your vision. I just feel, and I definitely feel like on behalf of my team, so grateful that we can be witness to this beauty and wisdom and power, and that you get to own how your work is viewed. That feels just really important. Grateful that we could be a part of making that happen. So just for those out there, we do have a few more programs before the calendar year ends. December 1st and 3rd, we have 2 virtual offerings in support of Visual AIDS' Day Without Art. Both can be viewed on our website. On December 5th, there is the 7th annual Leah K. Green Artist Talk honoring Sanford Biggers with a conversation moderated by Derek Forger. And this program will be taking place at the Forum at Columbia University, and we will also be screening it virtually. And then on December 8th, the Smokehouse Associates Writers Forum featuring Eric Booker, Charles L. Davis II, Ashley James, and James Traynor in conversation. And that program will be taking place in person at Storefront for Art and Architecture. More information on all the programs can be found on our website or by signing up for our newsletter Studio Notes. And before we sign off, I would love for each air to give us a word, a thought, a prompt, to let us continue to linger and think about you as we go back out into the world.
I'll start. A thought I've been having is, I keep asking, it's like, have I arrived? Is this the beginning? Is this the end of something? And I think that parting word is this has been a life cycle, you know, and it kind of feels in a lot of ways like both. You know, we've done something very big and I'm proud of everybody. In a lot of ways, we did a lot of work to get to the start of something.
Mm.
And that's been an interesting kind of reflection so far.
Thank you.
I can go. I don't have much of like I guess what I try and always think about, and I guess like I think about through the work, but also just life in general is what are the histories and lineages that you come from and how are you honoring them? I'm always trying to think about that. Like what do I come from? How do I give thanks? How do I carry it forward? So, and I think that's a huge thing that I was been thinking about throughout the residency too, because it's historic. It's like a monumental deal. It's like the residency, you know, and it's something that has always been a goal of being in. Now we're here and now we're like, we did the show, we did the thing. So how do we carry that forward after this? Thoughts?
I think the only thing I have to add is the question I think I had to learn to ask myself, like in the residency, which is, does it feel good? Right? Do I feel good? Because I think, you know, a thing that I've learned, and I think it can be applied to any context, is at the end of the day, you have to be proud of what you're doing and you have to feel whole and satisfied with what you're doing. And I think if something doesn't feel like it's serving you, if you can let it go, you should let it go. Or find ways to have that thing serve you. But I think, does something feel good? Does it feel right? Does it make you feel in general? I think is a really important question that I want everyone to think about in a lot of aspects of life and work.
Thank you. Nina Simone's coming to mind now. So it's like birds flying high. You know how I feel. You know how I feel. Breeze drifting in the summer sky. It's a new dawn. It's a new day. And I'm feeling good. Thanks, y'all. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, y'all. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much.
everyone.